Okay, so over to you, Commissioner, we're in your hands. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I've prepared some comments, which I'm going to read. That way I don't run on. And there's some slides. And if you see me waving, I'm waving to, who am I waving to? This person here, right? Okay, thanks. So the state of our fresh water is a matter for concern, both in terms of quality and quantity. And if we're going to turn around the declining state of our lakes, rivers and streams, freshwater modelling is indispensable to understand what's going on. You can't do without it, I think. Many of you already understand the importance of modelling as a tool to support robust evidence-based freshwater management. And this slide, not the one in front of you, but the one which I'm now waving to the gentleman.
This hearing is being live streamed, so this is
Yes, well, it's going to have performative value as well. If you could just keep your eye on me, please, so I don't have to make a fuss every time. This slide gives you an idea of how modelling can strengthen our understanding of waterways. This is a map, obviously at the bottom left-hand end of Te Waipunamu, and it shows the locations of water quality monitoring sites in Southland. The colouring of these dots shows measured concentrations of nitrogen from blue, which are low, to red, which are high. On-the-ground observations at monitoring stations provide a picture of water quality at specific locations, but not beyond. So that's why you need models. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see how models fill the gaps. So a model applied in this case provides a fuller picture of what's happening with total nitrogen concentrations in other streams across the region. And it's done by generating estimated concentrations in the river reaches based on measured data at the monitoring sites. That's a simple illustration of one role that models can play. Models can also help by assessing trends, estimating contaminant reductions, estimating the amount of available water that could be taken for uses, and estimating the impacts of climate change on water quantity and quality, and the list goes on. And regardless of the future framework of water regulation, whatever any government wants to do in this space, modelling will remain an important tool. Now, you may recall that in 2018, I delivered a review of the overseer model.
Yep. Yeah, it's gone.
Fine, right. There it is, overseer and regulatory oversight. And that exercise aroused my interest in the wider use of modelling. I'm still waiting for the recommendations on that to be fully implemented by the way. You still have a black box model, which is proprietary, and the government has not put that out there. So you might want to think about that one. Now, my new report, which, thank you for clicking, a review of freshwater models used to support the regulations and management of water in New Zealand. No, too far. Could you go back, please? This is hopeless.
In future, we'll.
Could you go back, please?
Yeah, yes. Go back. Back.
I think he's trying to work. Trying. It's just the system.
Other way.
No, you've gone too far.
The one that has the review for freshwater models.
Next one.
No. The next one.
There,
excellent. Thank you. I'll tell you when to change. The report on the right, which I won't need to read out the title, sought to understand just how well we're using modelling to support our efforts to get on top of our water problems. And the investigation involved a stock take of models currently in use by regional councils and unitary authorities, as well as a technical evaluation of the most commonly used models. It included a separate report which we commissioned on Māori freshwater models developed by or in close collaboration with mana whenua. Now, the key findings are as follows. It's a lovely diagram, this one. We isolated a large number of models that are being used, 75 in our stock take, many of them with overlapping functions. On this graph, you can see 47 of them, so these are the most used ones, that have been designed to model river water quality, those are the blue bars, and quantity, those are the brown bars, or both quality and quantity, those are the green bars on the slide. And what we found is that model development is siloed and fragmented. So not only are we using a very large number of them, siloed and fragmented, there's a lack of model evaluation against criteria, making it hard to judge which are fit for purpose. There's an overall guidance on model use falls short. Models aren't being used to their full potential. There's many single-use models. 60% of the stock take have been used just once, despite costing ratepayers and others really significant sums of money. And the models are used variably by councils, both for tasks and in terms of the complexity of the models. And I just want to read to you the last paragraph of my introduction. Rather than adding value, this is in the report I'm reading from, rather than adding value, the proliferation of models confronts regulators with the quandary of having to choose the best model and then defend that choice, which isn't an easy task. I mean, remember, some of the stuff gets litigated. It's a choice made harder when models lack transparency and are not systematically evaluated, and when there is a lack of guidance. And the report goes through which ones are truly transparent and which ones aren't. Looked at nationally, New Zealand's modelling resources dispersed and unevenly spread amongst regional councils, publicly funded research institutions, and some businesses. We identified, in addition, an overall shortage of modelling expertise, a lack of commitment to mana whenua developed models, and data shortcomings affecting modelling. So the more robust data you've got, the better the modelling. And if those data points aren't there, then the model is going to be less useful. And just to come back on that last point, if you just look at these two slides, these are from the first one you saw. It's a close-up of the southeastern corner of those catchments. And the map on the left, if you can see the dots, has fewer monitoring stations compared to the map on the right. Now, you'll note how the modelling outputs then differ. How do we know the model that is using a larger number of monitoring sites produces better estimates? Well, the right-hand model, the right-hand picture, has a higher measure of its performance. And visually, you can see that some of the eastern areas have lower estimates of total nitrogen concentrations, and thus they get coloured in green rather than light green or yellow, as this model is able to use the measurements from the monitoring sites in these areas, as well as monitoring sites on similar streams across the region. Now look, from a practical point of view, if you were a farmer in that area, and there weren't enough data points, the model might actually construe you to have higher nitrogen loadings than you've got. Of course, we can get far more fine-grained than this, but that's it's not the best illustration I could probably produce, but it was an easy one to do for you this morning. You can see it is actually the more data points you've got, the finer grained the modelling output. It's what you'd expect. In short, robust data and more of it make robust models, increasing the confidence we can put into the modelling outputs. However, currently, and this is part of a long-run message I've been trying to get through to this committee for the last 6 years, there is a shortage of high-quality data for freshwater policy and planning purposes. So once again, I'm going to say to you, until somebody takes this in hand and decides to make investments in the quality of information, you are going to have sub-quality decisions being made in respect of these sorts of environmental assets. So, very simply, 5 recommendations, and then I'm happy to talk to you about it. I think we need, we've taken it out. 5 recommendations. I think we need a national freshwater modelling support centre. Support is the key point. I'm not suggesting you drag everything back to do it in Wellington, but if you talk to regional council staff around the country who are trying to do catchment level modelling, they don't have any reference point that they can really talk to, can talk to one another. This is a small country. We don't need to have endless wheel reinvention. I think a small, and I really do mean small, a small team, high-powered modelling expertise so that regions can actually get advice. And I think the government should be in a position to say, these are open source models. These are the ones which have been investigated. This is the research that's been done to further elaborate them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can have some confidence, but you need people that you can talk to. Secondly, the Ministry for the Environment needs to give guidance, further guidance on the use of water models. They have already given some guidance on the use of modelling. We think that could be fine-grained to water modelling. We're recommending a rōpū of experts to support Māori modelling. Ministry needs to gather a team of people together who can help with that. Evaluation of models needs to occur. I think this is really important. Going off and choosing something off the shelf which no one else has used, or having something developed yourself. I mean, there needs to be transparency. If land users are going to be confident in what regulators are saying, they have to know that the tools being used have been properly and transparently evaluated. And finally, I think such a centre should be able to come up with a preferred suite of models. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Dr. Anna Hooper, who is actually a soil scientist, but she's turned herself into, she led the overview, the overseer review, and she has led this along with, and to do this piece of work, we seconded for a year a modeller, a water modeller from GNS Science. So we knew that we had somebody in the team writing this report who actually knew about water modelling, okay? And I've also got my Chief Policy Advisor, Matt Paterson, with me, and I have some other colleagues if we need specific questions. But that's the report. It doesn't seem to me to be a terribly complicated report. What it tells you is that we could be doing better, and maybe the government could help us do better in this particular case. So, happy to answer any
Thank you very
questions.
much. Anna and Matt, have you got anything you want to add at this stage, or are you just happy to respond to questions?
I will just add one thing about the suite of models that Simon's recommending is we don't want a system where the central government is dictating you must use this model or only have one or two, because you do need a variety of models, and that with that suite of models, your technical resource can help councils vary those models for their own local conditions. So you still get that localism, but it also does mean that those models can be seen more robust and will be harder to challenge legally from that perspective as well, because it would have been really well resourced by the government.
Okay, thanks. Now we're going to go, Rachel, did you have a starting question?
Sure.
And then to Mike, and then we'll go.
Why not? Thank you for that very clear presentation. Great slides. This support group that you're talking about, you said that you wanted a small, high-powered modelling team in that. What are you imagining there? What's
What I'm imagining, you won't be surprised to hear me say this, what I'm imagining is that if you had a proper Environmental Protection Agency, which is a genuine national level environmental regulator rather than an odds and sods department, you would have, and one of its functions would be the government's technical and operational advisor on the stuff. So if the government comes up with water policies, it's got people who actually know something technically, and I think the EPA would be the place to do it. And look, I mean, Anna, I don't know. If you had 4 or 5 people, you'd be way ahead of where we are now. I mean, there will be scores of people across the country trying to do this stuff in regional councils. It needs to be a tiny fraction of that. But I think this is the sort of thing governments are quite good at, is bringing together highly qualified technical advice and giving those people a mandate to fully inform themselves, link with the research community, link with the regulatory community, link with the user community, and be a high quality source of advice on the use of these tools. But it's, as Matt says, we're not interested, we should never be, I think, in some central directive where, one model rules them all. It's not about that. It's about trying to do a better job with what we've got.
Yes, so you're talking there about having a shelf of different models that people can select.
Well, and then,
appropriate for.
well, I'll let Anna answer that.
I was going to add on the support center. I think the key point is really around coordination of technical expertise. And that's really bringing that science and modeling skills, but also putting them not just in the research context, but really in the context of management and regulation. So it's really that bridging of the science and the policy, so that and providing really practical advice on what model to choose, in what circumstances, and how best to use it. So that's on that.
And those people don't necessarily have to be employed by the EPA full time. That could be a part-time role. Could be working for a university or a CRI. The important point is there's a central location that people can call upon their expertise. So individual councils don't have to go and find it themselves.
Just so that you're aware, I mean, the way this happens now is that these people all struggle to Wellington 3 or 4 times a year for a special interest group, and they sort of swap information. It's not the best way, I think, to do this.
Mike, then Huhana, then Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to talk about the data shortcomings and ask for a bit more elaboration on that, because I have a view. It's all well and good knowing what our finish line is, but we've got to know where we are, where the start line is.
Yep.
And I read through somebody's report, and we see it in our councils. They measure some of the water indices once a month, and if it's compromised, it distorts all the statistics and all the rest of it. And so just really your views on getting accurate and reliable data that can actually then be fed into the models, because the models are only as good as what is fed into them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can start by answering that, of course, basically, in a nutshell, the more and the more robust data you have, the better and the more robust the models will be. So because data and measurements and the monitoring and the modeling essentially go hand in hand. So you need one to develop the other and then to sort of further improve and calibrate. But I'd say that in terms of the methods, of course, at this point, I would say maybe the good start will be just to aggregate and use all of the existing information. Kind of that integration and collation of the information will be a good start, just to have all of that and then feed that all into the various models available. But I'd say the next bit is really around trying to improve some of the methodology in terms of really figuring out what are some of the key critical measurements that need to happen and what are some of the key, say, contaminants, or in terms of the water quantity considerations, what are some of the key indicators, and really seeing whether maybe some of even the newer technologies can help, both in terms of generating more data collection automatically, say through remote sensing, but also through just better methods and essentially also using better, more novel, like models for analysis. Because I have heard that you can do quite a bit of retrospective analysis, but sometimes a couple of key parameters are missing. And, you know, if you can add more of those measurements, they can help increase basically and build a better picture.
And just to sup on that, it's, you know, you've got a section in your report about, you know, what the courts and all this is, policy stuff gets tested in courts. I just get so frustrated at the sheer millions and millions of dollars we're spending around the country because there's been some not as robust enough data fed into a model, and the model says you should do this. And I just come back to, you know, how do we get better data to feed into that model to get better outcomes through a legislative, you know, through the courts, through everything?
Well, we share your frustration. And, you know, data doesn't arrive for free. But I was going to say, Mr. Chair, in a way, hopefully we can have this conversation again in the context of a report that I've done called Going with the Grain, because that report is, this is just looking at water. And it's looking at the monitoring data which is collected for water, and then how that gets used in models. But there's much more to biophysical modelling than just water. And, you know, you need to understand, when you said, I think we need to know where we start, where the start line is. It's not just the start line in terms of water. It's the start line of what the landscape is actually capable of, or was capable of, how the landscape's impaired. And if you look at Going with the Grain, which came out before this report, which you still haven't got to, and I understand the reasons why, but you'll see in there some of the work done in Southland using physiographics to pull together gobs of existing information to identify susceptibility points in the landscape. So that same Southland stuff you've seen, there's much, much, much more information there. And Southland is way ahead of lots of parts of the country, where you are now at the point where farmers are able to talk about particular solutions in particular parts of the catchment because they have confidence in the information. It's not just water information. They've got confidence in the information that they're being given. Now, there is a need for more data, and that costs money, but please understand there is vast amounts of data right now. They're held by a huge number of players. They're held by regional councils, obviously. They're held by central government. They're held by CRIs. They're held by universities. They're held by private consultants. And they're held through regional councils through consenting information and stuff that's been gathered. we need a data infrastructure to pull the stuff together in useful ways. And we have a fragmented and creaking data infrastructure in New Zealand for the environment. And I think that if you're going to talk about environmental law reform, you have to look at the quality of the information on which decisions are being made. So it's not just a question of let's get some more dots on that map. It's a much more fundamental issue of mobilising and using modelling, by the way, to mobilise all of that information to tell us interesting stuff.
We have another project that's looking just at that very issue about how can you get a better data ecosystem that we're hopefully launch sometime next year.
Yeah, we're actually doing work on this because we know funds are short, and we know that, you know, if you did things the way we're doing them now, it would cost a bomb. But there are new sensing techniques, there's AI, there's a lot of stuff which can make a huge amount of sense of the existing data, and also probably tell you where you do need to invest in more data, not just sort of starting numbly at the beginning and adding to it all. We need a much smarter approach here.
Just before I call Huhana, I'm conscious that we've got several colleagues who are not permanent members of this committee. If you want to engage, just let me know. Most welcome.
Thank you for identifying those gaps in terms of data collection and that hub that's needed within the system. And noting from the report also that there's a proliferation of models that confront regulators right now across the country. And then within the report, you also talk about the lack of commitment and investment in mana whenua engagement, and the existing models, the 34 that you've identified, haven't been implemented in a meaningful way, I guess. You know, can you describe it? Because knowing that mātauranga Māori and Western science can flow through together in terms of regulations, that would be good to explore.
Well, if you've, I've got Liana Barrable here, who oversaw the consultant who generated the special report for that. I mean, when you say they haven't been implemented, I mean, the case studies, there are a couple there which actually have, which show that this can be done. Liana, would you like to just attempt an answer to that?
Yeah, I guess within the case study report, there were the 34, and when we said that none of them were implemented, it was none of them implemented fully to achieve te mana o te wai.
Okay.
So there are, at least one case study did show that within that model, it's been used within the resource consenting process, which to the mana whenua of Rotorua, they said that it was, you know, pretty bang on. But yeah, I guess it's more about how to fully achieve te mana o te wai. But then within the regulatory system, the rōpū would be used to look at how to actually use mātauranga in our regulatory system. Science, as we know, and mātauranga can walk hand in hand, but once it starts getting into a system that isn't our own, it starts.
I should tell you, Liana's a marine scientist. She's just doing a PhD on something very abstruse. But she's living evidence, I think, of the fact that, you know, all information can be, not necessarily is, but can be valuable, and we can bring stuff together in a way which is useful. So if you want to go into the detail, the consultant's report is
online.
It's online. It's separately available on our website.
Thank you. And just to sup on that, and acknowledging the opportunity from mountains to sea, because you're a Marine, and this is why Māori. I value the way with which you're trying to bring to light the existing models, and what advice we can look to lock in that compulsion across councils up to give effect to te mana o te wai. Have you done any thinking in terms of the application?
Yeah, within the report, there was an assessment done, and really it was about the principles that sit within the national policy framework, as well as some of the other engagement requirements between council and mana whenua. And that kind of showed a bit of an imbalance between perception of engagement. And I think that will help if, you know, Hapu and Iwi pick up the document and kind of look at it like, okay, we need to make sure that these principles are adhered to as we're engaging.
And yeah, those results are by our contractor Lara Taylor. They're available on the website, and essentially really capture, especially as part of the stock take that she did was really the assessment across, and you can really see essentially a mixed bag.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. Just one thing, you shoot me down if you don't think I'm right, yeah, but I'm not the expert here, but my hunch, I'm from the Waikato, okay, and we have a statute and the River Authority, and it's all part of a settlement.
Yeah.
What you do there will not necessarily be the same in other parts of New Zealand. I don't think this is a thing where, and here am I for the science stuff, saying there should be central guidance and all the rest of it. I wouldn't be quite so confident about saying it in the space.
Yeah, and just in closing, thinking about it has been ad hoc. I've seen it in the north whereby councils informally work with like Ngāti Hine over the Taumāriri catchment, and it works really well, but it's not embedded and it's often based on staff relationships.
Yeah.
It's not a
I think
organisational.
you're talking probably, that is outside this report, and that comes to the whole RM system and
Yes,
how that
but
operates.
the recommendation in terms of having a rōpū, there were three things that the rōpū could assist in, and one of them is to look at, how to make sure that those relationships are not ad hoc and under a requirement that says thou must rather than I should.
Thank you.
Katie?
Well, one of the points that you made, Commissioner, in the presentation, well, in your report, actually specifically, was around the transparency versus the opaqueness of some of those models and how they stand up judicially. I'm always going to use Hawke's Bay as an example, and you've outlined the difference between Plan Change 6 and Plan Change 9 and how much better that is. Do you see there being sort of any organisations, regional councils around the country that if we did move to a, I won't say centralised, but supported, streamlined model, that they would sort of maybe have some repercussions judicially from the models that they currently use?
What do you think?
I'd say maybe all of the councils that currently have their regional plans locked up in the court, awaiting decisions, or maybe the ones that have just been recently made. I'd say these are some of the, instances that are generating some of the implications, essentially. But I was going to flip maybe the question the other way and say that when we obviously surveyed and interviewed all of the councils across the country, and I'd say we found that obviously maybe like Environment Canterbury has had to deal with the situations for quite a while, and as a result, it's sort of because of the various plan changes, they definitely have thought and they have tried different approaches and sort of learned from the experiences. But also in Environment Waikato Regional Council has also been using quite a few different models. So I'd say maybe these are the two that I would say I would flag from the positive side, more kind of just learning from, the experiences either within the council or from each other, essentially, and really trying to be, really thinking about essentially the purpose, the use of the model for the purpose, but also kind of trying to get as confident as possible, but also aware of the limitations in it.
I don't think you'd see a short-term change because everything that's going through has to be defended on its own merits. Longer term, there'll be more consistency and more transparency, which goes both ways. It will benefit the councils from having something a bit more robust that will be more easily for them to defend. But that transparency also allows users of the system to better understand how the modelling works, potentially run it themselves to come up with it. So it should also allow for a much more integrated discussion between consent applicants and holders and the councils.
And this is really in going with the grain, but look, in my view, there should be no serious debate between the regulator and the land user about the information. I mean, it should be, it should be high quality, it should be freely available, and then we can get on to saying, well, what can we do about the problem, rather than fighting one another over the inadequate data. It's a very unproductive way forward. So, and that's what's become pretty clear to me in Southland, that you're getting some fairly gutsy conversations about land use change and how you cope with this stuff. That's because it's down to a granularity just about at the level of the paddock. And what happens right now is if you've got inadequate data, and you come up with a high level picture, and a farmer knows that paddock's that way in winter, and that paddock's that way in summer, and that, if the information starts to come into line with that, then people are much more willing to talk about stuff. But if they feel that something's being pushed on them, where really the quality of the information to inform, say, a model is inadequate, people are going to be naturally distrustful. And, we really don't want to have a distrusted relationship between the regional councils and land users.
Bianca.
Thank you. I guess wanting a little bit of clarity around some of those points around transparency and the barriers to collaboration. You've mentioned, and the report mentions, the proliferation of models, the fact that it's fragmented model development, and that transparency is varied across different models. You've also got in there the fact that there is strong reluctance to share model codes. Part of it because of competition.
With the proprietary,
Yeah, proprietary. But you've also mentioned that councils are really keen for sort of a national level leadership on guidance and development. So I'm kind of trying to marry the two and trying to figure out where the pushback is likely to be to some of the recommendations, particularly around national level guidance, or?
The pushback will come from people who don't want any further central pressure. And this goes right back to the very earliest days of the Resource Management Act, that for better or for worse, a decision was taken to devolve a huge amount of responsibility to regions. However, the Crown reserved its right to give central direction. And the Crown has been very good over the last 30 years of saying, here's the policy, you do it. And by the way, there's no money to do it with. And so then you expose the regional council. They have to go out and justify to ratepayers why they're spending all of this money getting a model built and blah, 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 you see? So I think the pushback is some people who would see this, if indeed that was the intention, which it is not, but it would be if anybody said, well, this is just yet again the heavy hand of central government, which leaves all the dirty work to us, tells us what to do. Now, that is not what it's about. And I think we'd be pretty confident that regional councils would welcome high quality advice, which could save them money.
Oh, yes. We have heard throughout our interviews and discussions with the councils that they're really saying that they really need that practical support and practical help. Yes, there is the various guidance documents now published, although, as we note in the report, some produce conflicting messages and are not very water modeling or freshwater modeling specific. But the councils are lacking that next step, really around that practical guidance, practical support, of course, kind of some funding and some help with the implementation. And they will also welcome the, more of that consensus on the models used. Of course, they need to be adaptable to the local circumstances. So it's not one blanket, one size fits all approach. But they would really welcome, having a suite of, preferred, approved sort of models that also are developed and supported, that they can essentially use, ask, those technical experts to help tweak them to their local catchments or, regions or issues. That will definitely welcome that, because currently many of them are essentially saying, well, we even don't know what to use. And it's really kind of their choice, as Simon said, is made very hard given the lack of transparency, given that lack of guidance, and of course, given the lack of evaluation, because they simply don't even know, whether this model or this other model is best for, the specific task at hand for them.
Okay, thank you.
So,
I'm conscious of time, but we've got one last opportunity for David McLeod to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the most surprising thing about the report is the plethora of models that
Yes, we were surprised too.
it begs the question of where else are councils operating in a siloed fashion rather than in a shared services fashion. I think that's ultimately what I'm reading out of this report at a very, very high level. But if you was to be the devil's advocate, and we spoke about the advantages of councils benefiting by what you're advancing in your recommendations, At the end of the day, landowners are always very sceptical when they start getting things pushed upon them from above. And you really do need to convince them that the cost benefit of what you're trying to achieve here is worth it to them as a land user. And it's quite frankly, better modelling is coming from a better modelling system or software or application, but also the increase in data. You've spoken about that in depth. But data comes with a cost.
Yep.
And that in some councils, I can truly tell you that sometimes just an extra couple of data collection points moves the rates by over 1%.
Yeah.
And it's a very challenging conversation to have around the table at local government around that. And you do have to ask the question is, what is the actual problem here? What are you trying to achieve? And at the end of the day, you're trying to achieve a better outcome of an environment being fresh water.
Yep.
And so with that, you need to make sure that you're not sort of getting ahead of yourself with actually just putting in such a bureaucratic system, but really all the levers and everything you're going to use to improve that environment were going to be used anyway. So what have you actually advanced? You know, if you look at some of the tools crudely around riparian planting, around stock rating, of land, around nitrogen introduction, around land retirement, all the tools that we have to get better water quality. If we're doing that anyway, and it's going to cost you more to do some more data points, why are you doing it?
Well, one
So
reason.
we're just got to be careful in the context of each location around the country.
Of course.
You're not getting ahead of yourself with regards to the bureaucracy.
One reason why you might is that some of that stuff may be making no difference. People are spending money in good faith doing stuff which really isn't going to move the dial where you need to move it. I'm afraid you've got into the content of going with the grain, the report which precedes this one, which you still haven't had to your committee. But I think you're absolutely right. Just setting up a larger, bigger, more bureaucratic system which will cost more is certainly not worth doing where the problems don't merit it. There are parts of New Zealand which are under real stress and we need to know a whole lot more, and it's going to be very difficult to solve it. But so this is not a question of coming up with a centralised answer. It really isn't. But having said that, if you're in an area where there really is pressure and there really needs to be change, information, it doesn't guarantee that people will buy it, but if you haven't got it, they will simply reject it. So, we've got to find the sweet spot here, but I'm very keen to come back. And Mr. Chairman, may I say, I'm going to need more than half an hour. That report is a result of 5 or 6 years' work. And I really hope you can find some time to go into it in detail, because in a way, this is a pendant to it, which came out afterwards.
Well, we know that it's slightly got out of order, but you are aware of the constraints that this committee has had with other matters.
Of course.
We are approaching a period of time where we do have a window of opportunity, and if our clerk has not already scheduled a time, she will do very shortly. And I can assure you it will be at least 35 minutes, maybe.
You're very generous.
But look, no, your reports are always valuable. This committee always appreciates hearing from you and members of your team. And we do value the contribution and the work and effort that you put into them. And so all joking aside, we will absolutely make an appropriate amount of time available for a discussion on the Going with the Grain report. And we see that as part of the suite of reports that you've done.
They're all linked.
And they're all linked. So can I, on behalf of the committee, thank you, Commissioner, and your colleagues for joining us today. Thank you for the work that you do. And we're looking forward to hearing from you again soon.